My legs. I can't close them. The pain. The words just hung there in the diner's greasy air.
We know you were there.
The
It's
waitress
hard.
was a complete
We have the
wreck,
footage.
stumbling past the red vinyl seats.
Please, I can't talk
She
about
held her
this right
thighs
now.
clamped together as if
Find out
every
who tipped
single
them
step
off.
was a fresh kind of hell.
And
The
don't
floor was
disappoint
a
me.
checkerboard of black and white. 3 men who owned the night went
Right here.
completely silent as
This
her whisper
changes
hit them like a physical
everything
blow,
about the timeline.
cracking the room's greasy peace in two.
Make
I
sure you
can't close
initial
my
every page,
legs.
Kenneth.
It's so
We wouldn't want
sore.
any mistakes.
Her voice was barely a whisper,
Almost done.
but the bruises on her skin were shouting. And the move that Mafia boss made next would become a story told in hushed tones all over town. But before we get to that, tell us in the comments what part of the world you're watching from. And if you're hooked on this story, go ahead and subscribe, because what I have waiting for you tomorrow is on another level. Okay, back to the story. Christopher Giancarlo knew his way around human suffering. He could tell the difference between a man's fear and his soul-deep agony. But nothing could have prepared him for the girl who all but collapsed against the polished chrome counter. She was 22, maybe 23 years old. The dark hollows beneath her eyes looked like they'd been pressed there by a ghost's thumbs. Her black and white uniform was ripped at the bottom. One of her shoes was gone, and the other was so scuffed up you couldn't even tell what it used to be. Damp strands of her light brown hair were stuck to her neck, and with every tiny motion, you could see her whole body screaming in protest. Giancarlo placed his espresso cup on its saucer with a slow, deliberate click. Every one of his senses was on fire. His men, Victor and Dante, turned to stone. The jukebox in the corner seemed to die out, leaving only the sound of the waitress's shallow breathing and the far-off sound of dishes being handled in the back. The night cook was frozen solid, his spatula held in the air over the grill. She stopped right in the middle of the room, her legs shaking violently, her hands pressed against her lower stomach. Her face was flushed from the pain, but there was something else there, something much darker. It was shame and raw terror, the kind that comes from being hurt in a way that leaves no visible marks but poisons the very air around you. Giancarlo got to his feet slowly, his palms up where she could see them, his movements careful. "You're hurt, sweetheart." His voice was low, stripped of its usual authority, the voice that had ordered men to their graves now sounding almost gentle. The girl managed a nod. A tear carved a path through the makeup she'd used to hide a bruise on her cheek. It was a new one, maybe 12 hours old, the kind that would be a deep purple by morning. "My landlord." She had to force the words out, and it looked painful just to watch her swallow. "Last night. He told me the rent was overdue. He told me I could pay in other ways." Her posture wasn't about being shy. It was about pain. A deep, searing pain that made her bite down on her lip with every slight shift of her weight, with every single attempt to find a position that didn't send fire shooting through her. "What's your name?" he asked her. "Lyra." She breathed the word out like it was a confession. "Lyra Hart." He kicked the door in. He shoved me when I resisted. I fell against the bed's frame. Something sharp, something metal, caught me. I think it tore something inside me. I went to the emergency room, but I don't have insurance, and they told me they couldn't do anything about the cost without a police report. Behind Giancarlo, Victor let out a sharp, angry breath. Dante muttered a brutal-sounding curse in Italian, the type that calls on saints to witness a promise of violence. Giancarlo's face hardened, becoming a cold mask of resolve. It was the look he got right before he made a decision that would change someone's life forever. "You came to the right people, Lyra. We're going to fix this for you. I give you my word." He came around the counter, taking measured steps, hyper-aware of how terrified she was. She flinched when he got close but didn't back away. She had run out of places to go. You could see that sense of complete defeat in her eyes. He gestured to the closest booth. "Sit down, take it easy. Now is not the time to act tough." Lyra sank onto the red vinyl with a pained gasp that she barely managed to contain. She grabbed the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white, breathing through her nose in a practiced way to manage the pain. I shouldn't be here. I know who you are. The whole city knows. But there was nowhere else for me to go. The cops. They don't help people like me. And my landlord. He knows people. He said if I ever said a word, if I caused him any trouble. Giancarlo slid into the seat opposite her. His midnight blue suit was perfectly pressed, even at this hour. It was 3:30 in the morning, and he looked like he could walk into a corporate takeover or a funeral and fit right in. Connected to who? She shook her head, wincing as she did. I don't know any names. He just liked to brag. He said he had friends who could make someone like me disappear. He said no one would ever take the word of a waitress over a property owner. He said that girls like me were disposable. The word just hung there, fouling the air. Disposable. Dante moved to the front entrance, folding his arms and scanning the street outside the large glass windows. Victor went into the kitchen and said something quiet to the cook that made the man nod his head fast and shrink back into the shadows. The diner fell silent, except for the buzz of the big refrigerator and Lyra's shaky breathing. Giancarlo leaned in a little. How long has this been going on? 3 months. Her voice cracked, shattering into a whisper. It started after I lost my job at the department store. It went out of business. When I had nowhere to go, he offered me the apartment for cheap. He said I reminded him of his own daughter. I actually thought I was lucky. Then the first night, he was at my door, drunk, jiggling the handle. Just testing. It got worse after that. Last night was the breaking point. I told him I'd call the cops, and he just laughed at me. Said I didn't have any proof. He said, everyone would just think I was a tenant trying to get out of paying what I owed. Victor returned, kneeling by the booth with a grace you wouldn't expect from a man his size. I got a hold of Doc Ferraro. He's on his way. He'll be discreet. There won't be any records unless you ask for them, and he won't ask any questions. Lyra's eyes grew wide. I can't pay for a private doctor. I make minimum wage and tips. I have about $70 in the bank. You're not paying for anything. Giancarlo's tone made it clear that this was not up for discussion. It was the same voice he used to end territory disputes for good. Dante, bring down the security shutters. I want this place sealed up tight. Nobody comes in here unless I say they can. Victor, call our people. I want a security perimeter set up in the next 15 minutes. The metal shutters came crashing down, and the sound echoed like a cell door slamming shut. The diner went from being a public restaurant to a private stronghold. The hanging lights cast long shadows, turning the cheerful 50s design into something serious, protective, and threatening. Lyra stared at Giancarlo, with confusion and hope fighting for control of her face. Why are you doing this for me? You don't know me. I'm a nobody. Giancarlo was silent for a second, just studying her expression. The fear, the pain, and the desperate wish that someone, anyone, would finally step up instead of looking away like everyone else always did. Because nobody else will. And because monsters like your landlord operate thinking that girls like you have no one to turn to. That's an idea that needs to be corrected. Victor pulled a chair over, its feet scraping loudly against the tile floor. Boss, if this landlord is connected the way she says, we could be walking into another family's business. It could start a war we don't want. Then we find out whose family it is. Giancarlo never took his eyes off Lyra. And we decide if their connections are more important than doing the right thing. Dante spoke from his post by the door, his accent sounding stronger than usual. The news is going to travel fast. The entire city will know you stepped in for a waitress. They'll have questions. They'll draw conclusions. Let them ask. Something in Giancarlo's expression changed. It looked like he had found a new sense of purpose, like a man who had been looking for a reason behind all the violence and had just found it in offering protection. Let them know that there are still some lines that even I won't allow a man to cross, that even in this world of mine, there are some rules. And one of those rules is you do not prey on the helpless and expect to just walk away. The kitchen door swung open and a man in his 60s walked in, carrying a scuffed-up leather medical bag. He had salt and pepper hair, rock-steady hands, and the look of a man who'd seen too much to ever be shocked again. Doc Ferraro. He took one glance at Lyra, and his expression became serious with professional concern. Christopher. He nodded to Giancarlo, then gave Lyra his full attention, his voice gentle with decades of practice. I'm going to have a look at you, young lady, if that's all right. And after that, we'll talk about what your options are and what needs to be done. Lyra looked at Giancarlo one last time, searching his face for any sign of a lie or a hidden reason. All she found was grim resolve and what looked like a cold anger on her behalf. She nodded slowly. Okay. Please help me. It hurts so much. Giancarlo stood up, giving them space but staying close. Victor, Dante, with me. Give the doctor his room. They moved to the far corner of the diner by the jukebox, their voices low and urgent. Giancarlo took out his cell phone, and the screen lit up his face with a blue light. In the reflection of a chrome napkin dispenser, he could see Doc Ferraro talking quietly to Lyra. Her answers were too quiet to hear. After 5 minutes, the doctor came over to them, his face grim. She needs more than I can offer her here. There are internal injuries and they could be severe. I need my clinic, my equipment, and better lighting. The exam I can perform here is not enough. Giancarlo's jaw tightened. How bad is it? It's bad enough that if we wait for morning, we're looking at the risk of permanent damage. Doc Ferraro's voice was clinical, but there was a fire in his eyes. This was not some accident. The pattern of the bruises tells me it was sustained force, and from what I can see, this is not the first time she's been hurt. 1107. Some of these injuries are old, already on the mend. This guy's behavior is getting worse. The doctor's words landed like a stone in Giancarlo's gut. My car's out back. We're going now. Doc Ferraro gave a sharp nod. See you at the clinic. Give me 20 minutes. His eyes cut to Lyra, who was staring at them, her gaze filled with terror. Go easy on her. The shock is hitting her as hard as the pain. 1134. Giancarlo moved back to the booth, lowering himself to her eye level. We're getting you to a place with proper medical gear. My car is ready. Tell me, can you walk? Or do I carry you? I'll try. Her voice was a fragile whisper, all the fight gone out of it. I don't want to be a problem. You are not a problem. The conviction in his own voice surprised him. 1156. You're a person who is in trouble. There's a world of difference. Victor was already heading for the diner's rear exit that opened into the alley. Dante pulled the vehicle up, a black sedan with blacked-out windows, its engine a low thrum in the 3:45 a.m. stillness. When Giancarlo helped Lyra stand, her sharp intake of breath felt like a blade twisting inside him. 12:22. The moment her legs buckled, he acted without hesitation. He scooped her up, one arm beneath her knees and the other supporting her back, conscious of her potential injuries. I can make it, she protested, her voice faint. Conserve your energy. His words were soft, but carried an undeniable finality. The journey to Doc Ferraro's clinic was 18 minutes through deserted streets, with Lyra in the back seat and Giancarlo beside her. 12:50. Victor drove while Dante rode shotgun, his eyes constantly sweeping their surroundings. She tried to keep a space between them, pressing herself against the door, but every dip and crack in the road etched a new line of pain on her face. Halfway to their destination, Giancarlo spoke in a low voice. You can rest on me. It'll be better than taking the bumps against the door. Den 1311. She paused for a second before slowly shifting her weight towards him. When the car lurched into a pothole, she grabbed his arm on instinct, her grip astoundingly strong for someone so weakened. "Sorry," she breathed. "Don't be." He held his ground, not for needing assistance, not for being injured, and absolutely not for having the will to live. Bit 1336. Tears began to flood her eyes, the control she'd held since the diner finally shattering. "I thought about giving up earlier tonight after he was gone. I figured it might be less painful." Giancarlo's tone turned to steel. "That is precisely what animals like him depend on, that you'll feel too much shame or be too worn down to ever fight. 1400. That you'll point the finger at yourself instead of him. I did resist. That's why he got so vicious. I tried to push him off, and he became enraged. Called me unappreciative. Claimed he could have kicked me to the curb but was doing me a favor by letting me stay. That isn't generosity." 1423. Giancarlo watched the streetlights streak past the window. Real kindness doesn't demand fear or pain as repayment. The clinic was situated in a quiet residential area, in an anonymous building that blended in with the houses. Doc Ferraro was already waiting, the backlights on and the door unlocked. He led them into an examination suite that was impressively equipped. She 1448. Polished medical tools shone under intense lighting. The room smelled of sterilizer and something else, a sense of safety, of competence. Giancarlo gently laid Lyra on the examination table. "I'll be right on the other side of this door. Doc Ferraro is the absolute best. You're in good hands now." She tightened her grip on his hand before he could move. "Don't go too far, please." 1513. "I'll be waiting just beyond that door." He gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "No one is getting past me, I promise." The exam stretched for 45 minutes. Giancarlo paced the small waiting room while Victor and Dante secured the entrance. Every sound from within the exam room tightened the knot in his stomach. He had ordered beatings, witnessed savagery, and plotted revenge. But hearing Lyra's choked cries of pain felt intensely personal, igniting a deeper rage. 1546. At last, Doc Ferraro appeared, drying his hands, his face a grim mask. Internal lacerations, severe pelvic bruising, and a possible fracture of the tailbone. She's going to need complete rest, medication, and a course of therapy. Her injuries are all consistent with a violent sexual attack. Is it all documented? Giancarlo's voice was frigid. 1615. Everything. Photos? A full written assessment? It's already handled. The doctor looked him straight in the eye, but she's scared to death of pressing charges. She's convinced nobody would believe her story. And judging by what she's told me about her landlord's connections, she's probably right to be afraid. Let me handle the landlord. Giancarlo started for the exam room door. Baca, 1639. Can we move her? It's not advisable. She needs to stay put for at least 12 hours. I've got a private recovery room upstairs. She can have it as long as she needs. Then we're staying too. Giancarlo turned to Victor. Arrange for the men to cover us in shifts. Nobody gets close to this building unless I clear them. In the other room, Lyra was curled on her side in a defensive fetal position, a blanket drawn tightly to her chin. 1712. Her face was ashen, her eyes swollen and red. When Giancarlo stepped inside, she looked at him with an expression that pierced right through his hardened exterior. It was trust. A desperate, breakable trust from someone who had no reason left to trust anyone at all. Doc Ferraro said you have to rest, he began, his voice softer than it had been in years. 1736. There's a room upstairs. It's safe, and it's guarded. You won't be by yourself. Will you stay? The question was barely a whisper. I know it's a strange thing to ask. We don't know each other, but I'm afraid that when I close my eyes, he'll be there. That I'll wake up and find myself back in that apartment. Giancarlo pulled a chair next to the table and sat, embodying the patience of a man who had waited out far deadlier scenarios. Day 1804. I will stay. When you wake up, you will be right here, and you will be safe. I give you my word. Why are you doing all this? Tears streamed down her face. Men in your world don't help people like me. People in my world don't often have the chance to set things right. He held her gaze. Let's just say this is my chance. 1831. She finally let her eyes close, sheer exhaustion defeating her fear. Within moments, her breathing settled into a deep, steady rhythm. Giancarlo sat there, watching over her as she slept. This broken woman had stumbled into his diner and cracked open a part of him he thought had withered away. The instinct to protect. Not for gain, not for status, but just to shield someone who deserved it. 1857. By 6:30 that morning, Giancarlo had made 8 separate phone calls. Victor stood by the window in Doc Ferraro's office, going over notes on a legal pad. Dante reappeared from a recon mission with a manila folder stuffed with paperwork. Upstairs, Lyra slept soundly, aided by painkillers, finally getting the rest her body was crying out for. 1919. Giancarlo laid out the folder's contents on the desk. Pictures, property deeds, credit histories, and background files. The face staring up from the driver's license photo was completely unremarkable. Kenneth Grimes, 52 years old, owned 4 rental properties in the area. His credit was clean, and he had no criminal history. 1942. On the surface, he was just another small-scale landlord. Victor tapped his notepad. But there's always another layer. It's a rule with men like him. Dante then produced another set of documents, these on cheaper paper, clearly acquired through back channels. Grimes doesn't fully own those buildings. 2004. They're being financed by a front company known as Riverside Investments, and Riverside is tied to the Calabrese family. A cold stillness fell over Giancarlo. The Calabreses operated a couple of neighborhoods away. They weren't in the big leagues, but they were established enough to create headaches for anyone who crossed their path. They specialized in protection rackets, loan sharking, and some minor trafficking. 2029. It wasn't his territory, so it wasn't his problem. Until now. How deep does the connection go? Giancarlo's voice remained flat. Deep enough. Dante slid another sheet of paper over. Grimes has been kicking up tribute to the Calabrese outfit for 3 years. 10% of his rental earnings. In return, they provide the muscle when he has issues with tenants. 2059. They persuade the police to ignore building code violations. They make any inconvenient complaints simply vanish. So, if Lyra had gone to the cops, they would have taken a report and buried it. Victor's tone was matter-of-fact. A detective or two on the Calabrese payroll would have made sure of that. A girl like her, without family or money, standing against a connected property owner. She never stood a chance. 2125. She'd have been dismissed as a troublemaker, maybe even threatened with charges for filing a false claim. Giancarlo picked up the photograph of Grimes and examined it. The man had a soft face and thinning hair, the kind of guy who could smile at you while calculating exactly how to screw you over. And the attack on Lyra. This wasn't his first time. 2148. Dante laid out 3 more files. I dug up 2 other complaints from the last year. Both from women, both previous tenants. In both instances, the cases were dropped for lack of evidence. One of the women fled the city. The other one withdrew her statement after her apartment was broken into and completely wrecked. A clear pattern. Giancarlo set the picture down with cold precision. 2211. He targets vulnerable women, gives them a deal on housing, and then leverages that vulnerability to his advantage, with the Calabrese family running cover for him. That's the long and short of it. Victor stepped up beside the desk. Which means we've got a situation. If we go after Grimes, the Calabreses will take it as a direct challenge. It could set off a war we're not equipped for. 2232. Or it could be a perfect opportunity to send a signal. Giancarlo leaned back, steepling his fingers. A signal that certain lines exist that even connected men are forbidden to cross. That preying on the defenseless will not be permitted, regardless of who is offering protection. Boss, with all due respect, the Calabrese family won't see it that way. Dante's voice was heavy with warning. 2256. They'll see it as a direct insult to their setup, making a move on their turf without getting the nod. Forgiveness isn't exactly Angelo Calibrese's strong suit. Then we will make Angelo see this isn't about turf. Giancarlo's voice dropped to a frigid calm. This is about the code. There are lines you don't cross in this life. 2319. And one of those lines is you don't prey on the defenseless and call it an enterprise. The legal system is a dead end. Victor stated it with blunt finality. Any official complaint will vanish. Any lawyer Lyra brings in will be buried by Calibres's influence. The law won't touch him. Then we go around the law. Giancarlo stood, crossing to the window to gaze at the street below. 2344. We settle this the old-fashioned way, face-to-face, personal, and we leave no doubt as to why it went down. You're suggesting we hit a Calibre's asset, Dante said, letting the words hang in the air to be sure he heard right. No permissions, no negotiations over territory. We just grab him. I'm suggesting we deliver a long overdue reckoning to a man who's dodged it for years. 2408. Giancarlo turned from the window to face them. And I want to send a message that this isn't about business or territory. It's about drawing a line in the sand. Some acts are unacceptable, no matter whose pockets you're lining. Victor and Dante shared a look. This wasn't Giancarlo's style. He'd built his empire on precision, on strategic pacts and careful diplomacy. 2434. To move on someone under Calibre's protection without any groundwork was a gamble that could start a war. What happens to the girl? Victor pressed. If this blows up, if the Calibre's family strikes back, she's in the crosshairs. Then we make her untouchable. Giancarlo's tone was absolute. And we ensure Grimes learns that what he did to Lyra wasn't just a transgression. It was the last mistake he'll ever make. 2504. So what's the play? Dante asked, closing the file. Meticulous. Giancarlo moved back to his desk, arranging the papers with deliberate care. Stage 1, we dig deeper. I want Grimes's entire life mapped out. His habits, his vices, his contacts, the places he thinks he's safe. Stage 2, we make contact with a neutral third party. Someone who can get a message to Angelo Calibres without starting an immediate war. 2532. You're looking to negotiate? I'm looking to inform. There's a world of difference. Giancarlo gestured to the other victims' files. We frame this for Angelo as a stain on his whole operation. We explain that having a predator on his payroll is bad for his reputation. We give him a chance to cut Grimes loose before we make our move. 2556. And if he tells us to pound sand, then we make our move regardless. Giancarlo's gaze was like steel, and we handle the fallout. But I refuse to let that animal get away with what he did to Lyra simply because he pays tribute to the right family. A heavy silence filled the room. From the floor above, they could hear the faint movements of Doc Ferraro tending to his patient. 2621 outside, the city was stirring. People were starting their day, completely oblivious to the decision being made in this anonymous building, a choice that would send shockwaves through the entire underworld. Giancarlo looked at his crew. We play this smart. We play this clean. But we play. No young woman should have to endure that because the system is broken and criminals gave him shelter. 2646. That protection ends tonight. Victor gave a slow, deliberate nod. I'll tap my sources, find out who can deliver a message to Angelo Calibres, and I'll keep digging on Grimes. Dante gathered the folder. By morning, we'll have him inside and out, every vulnerability, every dark secret. Good. Giancarlo started for the door. 27:10, I'm going to look in on Lyra. When she comes to, she needs to know we're taking care of this, that she has no more reason to be afraid. He took the stairs to the recovery area, easing the door open. Lyra was still unconscious, her features finally relaxed. The deep lines of trauma smoothed away by medicine and pure exhaustion. 27:32. He eased back into the chair next to her bed, ready for the long haul, because this was what it meant to protect someone. It wasn't just about neutralizing a threat. It was about standing guard, being the shield between her and the world, and proving someone was willing to stay. Lyra's eyes fluttered open at 2:15 in the afternoon. She blinked slowly, her expression clouded with confusion until memory crashed back in. 27:59. The ache was still there, a dull throb beneath the medication, but it was there. She shifted her head and saw Giancarlo in the chair, alert, his gaze fixed on the door with the watchfulness of a man who had given his word. "You're still here." Her voice was a raw whisper. "I told you I would be." He rose, pouring her a glass of water from a pitcher. Just small sips. 28:25. Doc Ferraro says you'll be dehydrated. Her hands trembled as she took the glass, managing 3 tiny swallows before her body protested. "How long was I out?" "Almost 8 hours. You needed the rest." He gently took the glass from her and set it down. "How's the pain?" "Muted." "It's not gone, but it's muted." She tried to adjust her position and winced. 28:50. Where am I? Doc Ferraro's place. You're fine here for now, but we're moving you someplace more secure, a place you can properly recover while we sort this out. A flash of panic crossed her features. My apartment. I have to get my things. My papers. The pictures of my mom. My whole life is in there. We've already had people there. 29:13. Victor cleared out everything personal. Your clothes, documents, photos. It's all en route to a secure place as we speak. You will never set foot in that apartment again. But my rent. He's going to come looking for me. Let him. Giancarlo's tone was flat and cold. He won't find you. And by the time this is over, he'll have much bigger problems than a tenant who skipped out. 29:37. Doc Ferraro came in with a wheelchair, his face a mask of professional calm. "Time to get you moved, my dear. I've already briefed Mr. Giancarlo on your aftercare. Painkillers every 6 hours. Bed rest and keep movement to a minimum for the next 72 hours. Where are you taking me?" Lyra's eyes darted between the two men. "To a safe place." Giancarlo helped her into the chair, his touch surprisingly gentle for a man of his build. 3004 place where my men can watch over you around the clock, where you can heal without looking over your shoulder. The safe house was tucked away on a quiet suburban street, a 2-story home with a tall fence and little exposure from the road. Nothing about its appearance screamed safe house or criminal hideout. It was just another cookie-cutter home, which made it perfectly invisible and secure. 30:30. Victor was waiting for them at the door. Perimeters tight, 4 men on rotation, reinforced windows, and a rear exit strategy is in place if we need to bug out fast. The inside of the house was simple, but comfortable. Giancarlo carried Lyra up the stairs to a bedroom that was clearly ready for her. Fresh linens, low light, and her personal effects were already laid out on a dresser. 30:55. The pictures of her mother had been placed on the nightstand. Lyra's eyes welled up the moment she saw them. "You got everything." "Everything we could locate," Victor said from the doorway. "If anything's missing, just make a list. We'll go back for it." "Thank you." She looked at the circle of men around her. 3118. Hardened criminals were showing her more decency than anyone had in a long time. I don't get it. Why are you all doing this for me? What do you want? Giancarlo helped her settle into bed and drew the blanket over her. We want you to get better, feel secure, and stop living in fear. That's the extent of it. Nobody does something for nothing, she said, her voice heavy with bitter experience. 3143. Everybody has an angle. Then let's call this a payment on an old debt, for all the times good people look the other way. He walked toward the door. There's food downstairs. Your medicine is on the nightstand with the dosage. One of my guys will be posted right outside this door, 24/7. You need anything, and I mean anything, you tell him. 3205. What if he finds me? He won't. The conviction in Giancarlo's voice was absolute. But on the off chance he does, he'll have to get through 6 of my armed men to get to you. And that coward doesn't have the stomach for it. Dante stepped into the doorway. I've got the first watch. Kitchen's all stocked up. Doc left a list for meals. Simple things. Soup, toast, keep it light. 3229. Lyra managed a weak nod, the exhaustion pulling her back down despite the long rest. Are you coming back? She asked, looking at Giancarlo. Or is this it? I'll be back. He paused in the doorway. This isn't the end, Lyra. This is the start of making sure you never feel that kind of fear again. Darkness settled over the house like a protective shroud. Lyra lay in bed, the window cracked to let in the cool night air, the chirping of crickets a soothing sound against the distant hum of the city. 3301. She could hear the quiet sounds of movement from downstairs, the soft tread of boots, the low voices of the men as they changed shifts. At 8 o'clock, Dante brought her soup. At 10:30, a man she didn't recognize did a round, checking all the locks. At midnight, she heard Victor's calm, steady voice giving orders downstairs. 3323. Every instinct told her she should be afraid, plotting a way out, questioning every part of this insane arrangement. But instead, for the first time in 3 months, she felt a profound sense of safety. The simple fact that someone was standing guard, that help was a single shout away, that a group of men had decided she was worth protecting. It was staggering, surreal, and something she desperately needed. 3347. At 2 in the morning, sleep still eluding her, she carefully made her way down the stairs. Each step sent a jolt of pain, but the medicine kept it at a dull roar. Dante glanced up from the kitchen table, instantly on high alert. You're supposed to be in bed. Couldn't sleep. It's too quiet. She rested against the doorframe. I'm used to the sounds of the city. It's too quiet. A small smile touched his lips. Now that's a complaint I never thought I would hear. Too much quiet. Is he actually going to help me? The question that had been eating at her all night finally surfaced. Or is this just a temporary arrangement until I become an inconvenience? The boss doesn't do temporary. Dante's words were absolute. When he gives his word, he honors it. Even when it comes at a price, especially when it comes at a price. But why? What does he get out of all this? Maybe nothing. And maybe that's the entire point. Dante stood up, moving to pour her a glass of water. Sometimes, making things right is the only payment you need. The boss hasn't had many chances to do that. This is his chance. He's not about to squander it. Lyra took the water, her eyes fixed on the dark street outside the window. A car was parked at the corner, with 2 silhouettes visible inside. More bodyguards, more watchers, an entire legion of lethal men, all tasked with keeping one broken waitress breathing. It felt surreal, like a fever dream she was bound to wake from. Yet, the ache in her bones was real. The prescription bottle on the counter was real. The sound of Dante's calm breathing behind her was real. This was actually happening. This protection, this concern, this twisted salvation offered by a mob boss who had decided her life had value, and for that night, just for one precious night, she let herself believe it might just last. Giancarlo came back to the safe house at 7:30 the following morning, holding a leather briefcase and bearing the kind of information that could shatter everything. Lyra was already up, perched carefully in the living room, nursing a cup of tea Dante had made for her. She looked improved. Some color had returned to her cheeks, and the haunted expression in her eyes had softened. He placed the briefcase onto the coffee table with a deliberate weight. "We have to discuss Kenneth Grimes." Her hand quivered almost imperceptibly against the teacup. "What about him? What did you find?" Giancarlo unlatched the briefcase and drew out the top folder. "For the last 18 hours, my associates have been digging. What they've unearthed is far worse than we ever imagined." Victor walked in from the kitchen holding his own stack of papers. "Boss, the final witness just gave her official statement. That brings the total to 7. 7? Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. 7 women. Giancarlo laid out a series of photographs on the coffee table. Every one of them was a tenant of Grimes from the last 4 years, all in tough spots, all hand-picked. He tapped the first photograph. Jessica Ramirez, 24, a single mother. Grimes attacked her 6 months after she signed the lease. She went to the cops. The case was dismissed, citing a lack of evidence. Lyra couldn't tear her eyes from the photo. What became of her? She relocated 3 states away. Victor's voice was devoid of emotion. She was too terrified to remain in the city, so she abandoned her family, her friends, a job she was passionate about, and just fled. Giancarlo slid the second photo forward. Emma Pete, 19, a college kid juggling 2 jobs to cover her tuition. Grimes waited for her to fall behind on the rent, then made her the same proposition he made you. She turned him down. He attacked her anyway. Did she go to the police? She made an attempt. Victor produced a police report. She filed a formal complaint, provided a full account. One detective showed up to question her, and that was it. The case went nowhere. No follow-up calls, no real investigation. It just vanished into the bureaucracy, all thanks to the Calabrese connection. A dark realization dawned on Lyra. They buried it. Precisely. Giancarlo moved through the other photos. Sarah Kim, 26, an immigrant with poor English. Grimes used that against her. He threatened her with deportation if she ever spoke up. She took him at his word. She endured 8 months of pure terror before she finally left the country. Dante came in holding another file. "Boss, we just got confirmation on those 2 from 3 years back. Both incidents fit the exact same profile. Complaints were lodged, evidence was secured. Then, out of nowhere, the cases were shut down. The same detective was assigned to both investigations. The very same one. Let me take a wild guess." Victor's tone was grimly certain. "Detective Paul Hendricks. How did you figure that out?" "Because Hendricks has been on the Calabrese payroll for the last 5 years." Dante placed the folder on the table. "Any report that even brushes against their interests is funneled directly to him. He guarantees nothing ever sticks. A flawless track record of closed cases and 0 arrests." Lyra set her teacup down, her hand trembling. "So, even if I had gone to the authorities, even if I had reported him right away, it would have made no difference. Not through legal channels? No." Giancarlo's voice was cold steel. "The system is rotten to the core, designed to shield men like Grimes and the syndicates that profit from them. And that is exactly why we're going to bypass the system altogether." He retrieved a thicker file, this one filled with financial statements. But this is where it gets uglier. Grimes doesn't just assault his tenants, he makes a profit from it. Take a look at this. He laid out a series of bank records. Every single time a woman makes a complaint and then withdraws it, Grimes gets a payment from Riverside Investments, $5,000 per incident. They're paying him for this. Lyra's voice was filled with revulsion. The Calabrese family is paying him to attack women. Not explicitly, Victor clarified. The transactions are disguised as property maintenance fees, but the timing lines up too perfectly to be a coincidence. Every dropped case, every woman who vanishes. Grimes gets a bonus. It's predation as a business model. How many? Lyra asked. 14 payments over 4 years. Giancarlo's jaw was clenched. 14 women that we can prove. There could be more who never came forward, who were too scared or too ashamed or just knew that nobody would listen. A heavy silence filled the room as the sheer scale of their discovery settled over them. This wasn't just one sick man making one awful decision. This was a systematic, well-organized, and profitable enterprise. But what about the proof? Lyra gestured to the files strewn across the table. You have all of this. Financial records, witness accounts, police reports. Can't you bring this to someone? The feds. A district attorney. We could. Victor's tone made it clear they'd already been down that road. But there's a catch. The bank statements were acquired through channels that would get them thrown out of any courtroom. The testimonies are from women who are now too petrified to ever take the stand. And every police report officially concludes with case closed, insufficient evidence. So, from a legal standpoint, all of this is useless. Giancarlo put it bluntly. No DA would ever take this case. No judge would ever permit it in their courtroom. And trying to go through official channels would just tip off the Calabrese family that were making a play for their asset. They'd lock everything down, silence the witnesses, and make this evidence disappear. Then what's the purpose of digging all this up? Lyra gestured at the piles of paper. If you can't use any of it. Oh, we can use it. Giancarlo's voice dropped to an icy calm. Just not in a court of law. This evidence gives us a complete picture of who Kenneth Grimes is. It lays out his patterns, his tactics, his network of protection, and more importantly, it shows us where he's exposed. You're going to deal with him. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. We're going to deliver the only kind of justice that matters here. He looked her straight in the eye. The kind of justice the system is unwilling to provide. But before we act, I have to be certain you understand what that entails. What we're about to do is outside the law. It will be final. There's no coming back from it. Will he be stopped? Lyra's voice was unwavering. Will it prevent other women from enduring what I did? What Jessica and Emma and Sarah and the rest of them endured? Yes. Then I understand. She held his gaze. And I want you to go through with it. Giancarlo snapped the briefcase shut. Victor, get in touch with our contact. Arrange a sit-down with Angelo Calabrese for tomorrow. We'll show him this evidence and give him one chance to cut Grimes loose. And if he says no, then we proceed without his permission. Giancarlo rose to his feet, and we will send a very clear message that protecting predators has a price, even for a family with the history of the Calabrese organization. Dante began to collect the files. And what about the cop? Hendricks? He's a piece of this puzzle too. We'll handle one issue at a time. Giancarlo walked toward the door. First, we take care of Grimes. After that, we'll figure out how to deal with the rot that shielded him. The sit-down with Angelo Calabrese took place at 10:30 the next morning on neutral territory, a social club in Little Italy that had been the backdrop for interfamily truces for 3 generations. Giancarlo showed up with Victor, leaving Dante at the safe house with Lyra. The briefcase full of evidence rested on the table between them like a primed explosive. Angelo Calabrese was 68, with a mane of silver hair, and he wore the burden of his criminal legacy with a practiced air of class. He sat opposite Giancarlo, flanked by 2 of his own men, his face a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. You called for this meeting. Angelo's voice was smooth, betraying nothing. I'm all ears. Giancarlo opened the briefcase and laid the files out on the table. Kenneth Grimes. He's one of your assets. He kicks up to your organization, and in return, you give him cover for his business. Angelo shot a glance at the papers but didn't reach for them. And? This is a standard arrangement. It has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with me when that business involves the methodical assault of defenseless women. Giancarlo pushed the stack of witness statements across the table. We have 7 confirmed victims, and who knows how many more never spoke up. Your protection has given a predator free rein to operate for 4 years. Angelo's features tightened almost imperceptibly. Are you sitting at my table to give me a lecture on ethics? A man in your line of work? I'm here to give you a chance to cut ties with a man who is about to ruin your reputation. Giancarlo's voice was completely steady. When this gets out, and believe me, it will get out, the Caliber's name will be forever tied to sheltering a man who preys on women. Your entire operation will be stained for encouraging this kind of filth. That's not how you want to be remembered. Are you making a threat? I'm stating a fact. Victor chimed in for the first time. We've got the proof. We've got the people ready to talk right now. This can remain a private matter. But if you keep Grimes under your wing, we'll have no choice but to go public. And it won't be quiet. Angelo was quiet for a long time, his eyes scanning the documents. He finally looked up. What's your price? I want Grimes cut loose from your protection. Giancarlo met his gaze without flinching. And there will be no blowback on any of his victims. You also stay out of our way while we settle this. You're asking me to greenlight a move on a paying client. I am asking you to acknowledge that some money is too dirty to take. That your family has a code. That you don't shield monsters, no matter the price. The air in the room grew thick with tension. Angelo's crew shifted on their feet. Victor was a statue, hands in plain sight but poised for action. Giancarlo betrayed no anxiety, projecting a confidence that was almost brazen. Finally, Angelo spoke. You've backed me into a corner, Christopher. If I say yes, I look soft. If I say no, you drag my name through the mud. Either way, I take a loss. The hit to your pride is smaller than the hit to your reputation, Giancarlo countered, snapping the briefcase shut. And you get something far more valuable. Respect. The knowledge that even in our world, some lines aren't crossed, that the Calabrese family doesn't harbor animals. Angelo watched him for another tense moment, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. Grimes's protection is revoked. Effective immediately. How you deal with him is your affair. But his real estate holdings come back to Riverside Investments. That is not up for debate. Those properties go to the women he hurt. Giancarlo's tone was pure steel. We'll start with Lyra Hart. She gets the main building, the same one he was leasing to her. The rest go to the others whose lives he shattered. That is the only way this is over. You're demanding a steep price. I'm demanding what's right. There is a distinction. Angelo leaned back in his chair, considering it. He then offered his hand. Deal. The deeds are transferred. Grimes is cut off. But hear me, Christopher. If this cleanup job of yours brings any heat down on my family, if it attracts the wrong kind of notice, our next conversation will be under far less friendly terms. Giancarlo shook his hand firmly. Understood. This will be clean, professional, and final. By 6 o'clock that evening, Kenneth Grimes was bound to a chair in a warehouse down by the docks, with 2 of Giancarlo's men standing guard. The air was cold and thick with the smell of rust and damp concrete. A single bare light bulb cast long, distorted shadows. They had collected Grimes from his office at 4:30. No words, no reason given, just 2 men appearing and guiding him into a waiting car. Now he sat drenched in a cold sweat, his terror almost a physical presence in the room. Giancarlo walked in at 6:15, Victor just behind him with the briefcase. He dragged a chair over, sat directly in front of Grimes, and simply stared for a full minute, letting the man's fear fester. "Do you know who I am?" Giancarlo finally broke the silence. Grimes gave a frantic nod. "Everybody knows who you are. Then you know I don't make empty threats. I don't waste my breath on meaningless promises. When I make a move, it's final. Are we clear?" "I don't know why I'm here," Grimes stammered. "I haven't done anything to you. I don't do business anywhere near your turf." "You do business under Calabrese protection," Giancarlo stated, his voice neutral. "Or, more accurately, you did. That arrangement was terminated 2 hours ago. That means you are sitting in this chair with no allies, no bargaining chips, and no exit that doesn't go through me." The color drained from Grimes's face. "I pay my dues. I have never been late on a payment. Your money is no good here anymore." Victor opened the briefcase and began to lay out the files, because the Calabrese family has a policy against shielding predators, especially when the case against them is this airtight. Grimes stared at the folders, a wave of panic and dawning horror washing over him. "Those are sealed police files. You can't have those." "We have it all." Giancarlo's voice turned to ice. 7 women, 14 payoffs, 4 years of systematic abuse, all hidden behind a wall of dirty money. And as of this afternoon, that wall is gone. "What do you want?" Grimes's voice cracked. "Money? I have funds, real estate. I can give you whatever you want." "I want you to listen to me very carefully." Giancarlo leaned in. "You have 2 options on the table. Only 2. And you're going to choose one right here, right now. No stalling, no bargaining. What are the choices? You vanish. You will sign over all 4 of your properties to the names I give you. You will liquidate your bank accounts and leave half with us to be distributed to the women you harmed. You disappear. New town, new identity, a new life, and you are never heard from again. And the second choice? A cold, empty smile spread across Giancarlo's face. You refuse, and I will give this city a very public lesson on what happens to men who think they can hide behind corrupt arrangements. They will be finding pieces of you for the next 3 weeks, and every outfit in this city will know the reason why. They'll know Christopher Giancarlo doesn't tolerate those who prey on the vulnerable." Grimes was trembling violently now, tears starting to form. "I'll leave. I'll sign anything you want. Just please. I have a family." "So did your victims." Victor's voice was flat. "So did Lyra Hart before you tore her world apart. It's a little late to start worrying about family." "The documents are already drawn up," Giancarlo said, producing a thick stack of papers. "Sign them." After cutting the zip ties, Victor handed him a pen, but Grimes's hands were shaking too badly to hold it steady. The first document was a deed transfer. The property at 427 Oak Street to Lyra Hart. Total ownership. No debt, no conditions. Sign on the bottom line. Initial each page. Giancarlo watched every movement of the pen like a warden observing a death warrant being signed. Grimes scribbled his name, his handwriting a barely readable tremor. Next. Victor pushed another document forward. The building at 815 Maple Avenue to Jessica Ramirez. "She's gone," Grimes's voice cracked. "She left town years ago." "We found her." Giancarlo's tone was flat. "She will be notified that she is now the owner of a building worth $400,000. A down payment for what you cost her. Sign." The pen scratched against the paper. Another signature. Another piece of Grimes's former life was signed away to the women he had wronged. 6 more documents came after that, each a property transfer or an account liquidation. It was justice by contract, delivered far from any courtroom. By the time Grimes was finished, he had given up everything he had except for the clothes he was wearing and $20,000 for his relocation. Victor gathered the papers, photographed every signature on his phone, and sent them to a lawyer who was on standby to file the transfers immediately. Everything would be legal, binding, and permanent by morning. "You have 72 hours to get out of this city," Giancarlo said, standing over the broken man in the chair. "If you are still here after that time, if we hear so much as a whisper that you tried to contact any of your old tenants, this agreement becomes null and void, and we move to our second option." "I understand." Grimes could barely get the words out. "I'll be gone tonight." "Not quite." Giancarlo gave a nod to Victor. "One last thing." Victor took out a phone, started recording, and aimed it at Grimes. "You're going to make a full statement. A complete confession. Every assault, every threat, every dirty payment you took to ruin those women's lives. You're going to say it all on this camera." "No." Grimes shook his head wildly. "That's evidence. It could be used against me." "Exactly." Giancarlo's smile was cold as death. "It's our insurance policy. If you ever violate our terms, come back here, or cause any trouble for those women, this confession gets sent to every news outlet in the state. It goes to the FBI. It will go viral online. You will become infamous for all the worst reasons. You promised if I cooperated. I promised you could leave with your life. This is part of that cooperation." Victor held the camera rock steady. "Start talking." It took 23 minutes for Grimes to confess it all. Every attack laid out in cold detail, every victim named, every payment confirmed. By the time he finished, he was sobbing uncontrollably, a pathetic mess of a predator stripped of all power and protection. Victor stopped the recording and saved the file in 3 different secure locations. "Done. I can go? Just like that?" "Just like that," Giancarlo said, walking toward the warehouse exit. "You have 72 hours. Use them wisely." They left Grimes sitting in the chair, untied, surrounded by papers, crying under the dim light. One of Giancarlo's men would drive him to his office to get a single suitcase, and from there, to the bus station. By sunrise, Kenneth Grimes would be 3 states away, starting a new life with nothing. Giancarlo got back to the safe house at 9:45 that night. Lyra was in the living room reading a book Dante had given her, trying to keep her mind off the waiting. She looked up the second he came through the door. Hope and fear battled on her face. "It's done," he said as he set down his briefcase. "Grimes signed away everything. The building is yours. Full ownership. No liens, no strings attached. It will all be officially filed tomorrow morning." Lyra just stared at him. "The building? My building?" "Your building. 4 units, 2 of which are occupied by long-term tenants who pay on time and cause no trouble." 5737. "The 3rd unit's empty, been scrubbed clean by pros. It's yours the second you want it." "The 4th? You can rent it out for income, or leave it be. It's your call now. I own a building." She tasted the words as she said them, a foreign concept. "I've gone from barely scraping by for rent to owning an entire building." 5801. "Justice isn't always about punishment," Victor said, stepping in behind Giancarlo. "Sometimes it's about restoration, about giving back what was torn away." "Sir, you were owed safety. You were owed stability. Now, you have them both." "And him?" "Grimes is gone," Giancarlo stated, sitting across from her. "By tomorrow night, he'll be in another state with a new identity and a new life. If he's smart, he'll never show his face here again." R 5828. "And if he isn't smart, he'll find out our deal only keeps him safe as long as he vanishes." Dante added, "The confession Victor recorded guarantees it. One wrong step, and his entire sordid life goes public. He won't take that chance." Lyra sat in silence for a long moment, letting it all sink in. "So, what happens to the others?" "The other women are already being contacted." B 5853. Victor took out his phone and showed her a list. "Jessica Ramirez is now the owner of a building in the suburbs. Emma Chen got a substantial cash payout and the deed to a small apartment complex. We're using family contacts to track down Sarah Kim, who fled the country. We're ensuring every single victim gets what they're owed. This doesn't feel real. 59:16. Lyra stared at the three men as if they were part of a dream. It's real, Giancarlo's voice cut through, firm and absolute. And it's permanent. The deeds are being filed as we speak. The money is being wired. By noon tomorrow, it will all be legally binding and irreversible. Why? The question that had been eating at her finally came out. 59:41. Why do all this? Why provoke a conflict with the Calabresi family? Why are you giving us these properties instead of just keeping them for yourselves? Because some things are more important than profit, Giancarlo said, his eyes locking with hers. Because every one of those properties was paid for with money Grimes made by preying on vulnerable women. To sell them would be to take a cut of his filth. 1:02. Giving them to you and the others is the only way this ends right. Victor stood up. We ought to let you get some rest. Tomorrow is a massive day. You've got property inspections, meetings with lawyers. You have to start planning your new life. What do I owe you for this? Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. For something like this? There has to be a cost. There is no cost, Giancarlo said, moving to the door. You owe us nothing. 1:31. This was about setting things right, not a business deal. But men like you always want something in return. Then let me be the exception, he said, pausing in the doorway. Get some sleep, Lyra. When you wake up tomorrow, you'll be a property owner. Someone with security. Someone who never has to fear a landlord again. The door clicked shut, leaving Lyra alone to grapple with the unbelievable truth of her new beginning. 1:01 o'clock. The story drifted through the neighborhood like wildfire smoke. By 10:30 the following morning, as the deeds were being officially filed at the county clerk's office, the local diner had already fielded 3 calls from people asking if the rumors were true. By noon, when Lyra stepped into her building for the very first time as its owner, 1:01:19, a small crowd was already forming across the street, their eyes filled with curiosity. The waitress who got hurt. That's how they first referred to her. The girl who collapsed at Giancarlo's table. But by that afternoon, the narrative had shifted. The girl Giancarlo protected. The girl he went to war for. At the Italian bakery on the corner, Mrs. Duca was whispering to her patrons. Mule 1:01:46. Can you believe what he did? He went after the Calabresi family for that poor girl. Made Grimes sign away everything he owned. And Grimes? Vanished. Skipped town in the dead of night like a coward. Over at the barber shop, the men were debating the power play. It's a risky game, messing with Calabresi assets. But Giancarlo must have gotten the green light. 1:02:10. There's no chance Angelo would have just let that happen otherwise. At the laundromat, mothers discussed it over folding laundry. Maybe he's not the monster we thought he was. Maybe even he has lines he won't cross. Did you hear he gave the building to her? He didn't even keep it for himself. He just handed it over. By that evening, when Giancarlo entered the same diner where Lyra had collapsed 3 days before, the atmosphere had changed. 1:02:35. The familiar quiet still fell over the room. That current of fear still crackled in the air. But now, there was something else beneath it all, a mix of curiosity and respect. It was the dawning recognition that sometimes a monster will do monstrous things to another monster, and that act can transform him into something else entirely. The owner, an old-timer named Sal who'd run the place for 30 years, came to the table with a coffee. It's on the house, Mr. Giancarlo. 1:03:04. And I just wanted to tell you, what you did for that girl, that was a good thing, a right thing. Giancarlo simply nodded, accepting the coffee without a word. But Sal kept talking. My own daughter works nights. Sometimes she has to walk home by herself. To know that you won't stand for men like Grimes operating around here, that means something to a father. 10329. That means something to all our families. I didn't do it for praise. I'm aware. That's precisely why it means so much. Sal went back to his counter, but his words lingered in the quiet diner. At 11:15 that night, a call came through from one of Giancarlo's lieutenants. Boss, we've got a situation. Not a problem. Not really. But you need to know about it. 10355. What is it? A few businesses from Oak Street, 3 of them, sent people over to the warehouse. They said they wanted to thank you. They came bearing gifts, wine, food, even an envelope with cash. They're waiting outside right now. Send them away. I don't want their tributes. They refuse to leave, boss. They say they have to show their respect for what you did. That the neighborhood feels safer now. That their daughters and sisters and wives are sleeping easier at night. Giancarlo paused for a beat before giving his answer. All right. 5 minutes. And keep it brief. When he pulled up to the warehouse, a small assembly of people was already there, just as promised. They were the local business owners, the cafe managers, the ordinary people who had been forced to live under the shadow of Grimes and the crooked system that insulated him. An anxious tension filled the air as Giancarlo approached them, the group clearly unsure of how this powerful man would react to their presence. An elderly woman broke from the ranks, clutching a small box from her bakery. Signor Giancarlo, she began, her voice steady. My granddaughter was an employee at one of Grimes's properties. He made unwanted advances. She chose to leave her job instead of filing a report, because she understood it would be useless. But what you've done, forcing him to answer for his actions, running him out of our lives, you've provided the justice that the system refused to. 10506. We just wanted you to know that it didn't go unnoticed, that we appreciate it. Giancarlo took the box, his face unreadable. The law should have been the one to handle it. The fact that I had to intervene is a sign of a broken system. But you're the one who did, a younger man interjected. When the system broke down, you were the one who stepped up. Around here, that's what counts. 10528. That doesn't make me a hero. Giancarlo's voice was like stone. I'm the same man today that I was yesterday. This changes nothing about who I am. Perhaps not, the old woman offered a faint smile. But it changes how we see you. There's a world of difference between a man who only takes what he desires and a man who shields those who can't shield themselves. We're starting to understand that you can be both. Mio 10551. The group left soon after, their offerings accepted but their praise kept at a distance. Yet, the change was undeniable. The neighborhood's view of Christopher Giancarlo had shifted from one of simple fear to something far more intricate. He was still a dangerous man, someone you'd be a fool to cross. But he was also a man who, in the right situation, could be relied upon to act when no one else had the courage. 10620. Inside the safe house, Lyra was watching the 11:30 local news. The incident had become a story, albeit a heavily filtered and vague version. Property magnate Kenneth Grimes has abruptly left the area following the transfer of several properties to his former tenants. Sources close to the situation suggest this unusual settlement was brokered by unnamed community advocates. 10642. The Calabresi family offered no comment. Community advocates. A ghost of a smile touched Lyra's lips at the euphemism. That was certainly one way to describe what Giancarlo did. Dante was in his usual spot near the door. You realize what's happening, don't you? You're about to become a local celebrity. The girl that Giancarlo saved. I have no desire to be famous. It's a little late for that. Whoa, 10705. The story's already everywhere. People are calling you brave. They're calling him some kind of hero. This whole thing is turning into a legend. He's not a hero, Lyra said softly. He's a complicated man who chose to do something decent. That doesn't wipe away the rest of who he is. No, Dante conceded. But it doesn't erase what he did either. Sometimes, people can be two things at once. 10730. Sometimes the world isn't black and white enough for simple definitions. Through the window, Lyra could see the sprawling lights of the city. Out there somewhere was her building, with her name now on the deed. Out there somewhere, Grimes was on the run, with nothing left but his own humiliation and fear. And out there, 6 other women were just discovering that a piece of their stolen lives had been returned to them. 10751. And somewhere out there, Christopher Giancarlo was confronting the bizarre new reality of being seen as something more than just a threat, of being seen as complicated, of being seen as human. The town used to whisper about his brutality, his influence, his crimes. Now, they were whispering about something else entirely. About the Mafia boss who stood up for a waitress, who took on the Calabresi family over a matter of principle, who gave away a fortune instead of adding it to his own. 010822. The whispers were only going to get louder. The story was only going to grow. And after this, nothing would ever be exactly as it was before. 3 weeks later, Lyra walked without a trace of pain for the first time since that night. The physical therapy that Doc Ferraro had set up was working miracles. Her internal injuries were mending. The deep bruises had faded from violent purple to a faint yellow, and finally, to nothing at all. Her body was healing, slowly but surely, reclaiming itself from the trauma. She was standing inside the building's empty third-floor apartment, the one Grimes had packed with his junk, now completely transformed. Fresh paint coated the walls, new floors gleamed, and sunlight poured through spotless windows. This wasn't a rental, not a temporary space. It was hers. Victor had personally managed the renovation, making sure every detail matched her vision. The kitchen gleamed with brand new appliances. The bathroom had been gutted and rebuilt. The bedroom faced east, perfectly positioned to catch the morning sun. It was compact, but it was flawless. A sanctuary born from the ruins of a nightmare. The other 2 units were still occupied by their longtime renters, an elderly couple on the ground floor and a young teacher on the second. Both had a perfect payment history. Both had lived in quiet dread of Grimes, and both had cried tears of relief when Lyra introduced herself as the new landlord, promising fair rent and a well-kept building. She was stepping into the role of a landlord, getting a crash course in taxes, insurance, and building regulations. Victor had set her up with a trustworthy accountant. Dante pointed her toward a handyman who actually showed up. The building brought in a small but steady income, enough that she no longer had to juggle multiple jobs just to get by. But she needed to work. Being idle felt dangerous, like she was just waiting for disaster to strike again. At 2:30 that afternoon, she stepped into a little cafe just 3 blocks away. It was a cozy spot with local regulars, owned by a woman named Helena. Helena had known about Grimes and, over the years, had quietly offered jobs to several of his tenants, never prying, just providing a stable paycheck. "I'm looking for a job," Lyra said, her hands resting firmly on the counter. "Part-time, something flexible. I own a building now, so I need to be around for my tenants, but I need to stay busy, to have a routine." Helena looked at her, her eyes full of understanding. "You're the girl everyone's been talking about, the one Giancarlo helped. I'm Lyra Hart, and yes, he did. But I don't want that to be my whole story. I want to be defined by what I do from here on out. A smile spread across Helena's face. Can you start tomorrow? Morning shift, 7 to 1. It's a relaxed pace here. We don't get the late night scene. It's mostly regulars, just coffee and good conversation. That sounds absolutely perfect. One rule, Helena said, her tone suddenly serious. If you ever feel unsafe, if any customer gives you even a hint of trouble, you come straight to me. We take care of our own here. Thank you, Lyra said, her voice catching. You have no idea how much that means to me. That night, Giancarlo paid his first visit to the building since the deed was signed. He found Lyra on the third floor, arranging furniture, breathing life into the empty rooms. It looks good. He lingered in the doorway, respecting her space. You've done a great job with the renovations. Victor helped, she replied, placing a lamp on a side table and gesturing around. I never imagined I'd own anything. And now, I own the whole building. It still doesn't feel real. It's real, he said, his voice firm. And you earned it. I just wanted to see how you were settling in. Make sure you had everything you needed. I'm starting a new job tomorrow at Helena's Cafe. Part-time. It'll keep me occupied while I learn the ropes of being a landlord. That's smart. Stay active. Build a new routine. He shifted slightly, his silhouette framed by the fading light. My protection detail is still in place, by the way. You won't see them, but they're watching, ensuring no one bothers you. For how long? For as long as it takes. His tone left no room for argument. The Grimes problem is gone. But there are other men like him out there. Men who might look at you and see an easy target. They need to understand you're not. I'm not vulnerable, she said, meeting his gaze head-on. Not anymore. I survived. I'm a property owner. I have an income. I have a future. That isn't vulnerability. No. A faint smile touched his lips. It isn't. But having backup doesn't make you weak. Think of it as insurance. Why are you still doing this? Lyra finally asked the question that had been circling in her mind. You took care of Grimes. You settled the score. You could just walk away. Why are you still involved? Giancarlo was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the street below. Because for almost my entire life, power was about taking, about controlling, about bending the world to my will, he said, turning back to her. But protecting you, helping you rebuild, that's a different kind of power, the kind that actually feels like it matters. You're not responsible for me. I know. But it's a responsibility I'm choosing to take on. He started toward the door. That choice, the decision to protect instead of exploit, is the most significant thing I've done in a decade. Will you tell me about them? Lyra's question made him pause. The other women. Jessica, Emma, and Sarah. Are they all right? Jessica is turning her building into a group home for single mothers. Emma graduated from college and is now applying to law schools. Sarah got back from overseas last week. She cried for an hour when she found out about the property. A note of deep satisfaction was in his voice. They're all starting over, all moving on, because you made it happen. Because the system failed, and someone had to step in. He stood at the threshold. Get some sleep. Tomorrow is a new chapter. The first day of work in a life where you never have to be afraid again. After he was gone, Lyra stood by the window watching the city. The streetlights began to flicker on, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood. Her building, her home, her future. She remembered that night in the diner, the agony, the terror, the desperate gamble on the only men who looked strong enough to help. She had choked out the words that broke everything open. I can't close my legs. It hurts. Now she could walk without pain. She could work without fear. She could sleep without nightmares. She could own a building, create a life, and look forward instead of constantly glancing over her shoulder. The Mafia boss, who had seemed like just another predator, had become her savior. Not because he was a good man, but because he chose to do something when it counted. Because he discovered a purpose in protecting someone. Because he proved that even the most dangerous men can draw a line in the sand, can choose principle over profit, and can deliver a form of justice when the system won't. The city would keep whispering, twisting her story into a local legend, but Lyra would just keep living, keep working, keep building. She was no longer the girl who collapsed in agony, no longer the victim who needed rescuing. She was just Lyra Hart, landlord, survivor, a woman who learned that salvation sometimes shows up in the most unexpected forms, delivered by complicated people who were neither heroes nor villains. They were just human, just making a choice, just trying to do something right. And sometimes, that was more than enough. Thank you for following this incredible journey all the way to the end. If this story moved you, just wait until you see what's in store. The next one is even more powerful, more inspiring than you can possibly imagine. So please, don't miss out. Click on the video appearing on your screen right now and get ready for another amazing story that will absolutely capture your heart. Believe me, you'll be glad you did. Lyra's story is a stark reminder that the deepest wounds aren't always from violence, but from the silence of a system that was supposed to shield you. When the law turns a blind eye and power can be bought, evil puts on a respectable face and simply carries on. But it also shows us that justice doesn't always arrive in a perfect package. Sometimes it's delivered by flawed people who simply dare to choose the right side. Lyra wasn't saved because she was helpless. She was saved because she was worth it. And Giancarlo's redemption wasn't written in his past, but in the single, decisive choice he made when it mattered most. The ultimate lesson is this: protecting the vulnerable isn't a show of weakness. It's the only thing that gives strength any real meaning. And sometimes, a life isn't changed by a miracle, but by one person finally having the courage to say, "This ends now,"